we are going to get into today's session. Just to reiterate what Dr. Henning discussed earlier on, this is our ongoing English speaker series, which we have every 2 weeks. During this speaker series, we invite writers, authors, and cultural icons to come and speak with us as students and our faculties. So it is quite a huge privilege for us to be having a writer as influential and as internationally recognized as Niq Mhlongo with us this afternoon. I would like to outline the agenda for this afternoon. We have gone through the welcoming note. We have gone through our welcoming note, and we are about to get into the author biography, which will be provided by me. Afterwards, I've graciously asked Niq Mhlongo to provide a reading for us. And after the biography, he'll provide a reading for us from his first novel, Dog Eat Dog. We will then get into the Q&A session of this convocation. And after the question and answer session, we will then open the floor to discussions. We are expecting questions from the faculty and the students who are with us. And then we shall close and call it a day. So without further ado, it is my proud privilege to provide an author biography of Niq Mhlongo. Before he became an award-winning author, essayist, and travel writer, Nicholas Mhlongo was born in 1973 in Midway, Shawelo, a township located in Soweto, Johannesburg. He's heavily influenced by his hometown of Soweto, which he uses as the setting for most of his novels and short stories. Like many of his generation, Niq Mhlongo grew up witnessing the violence and disorder of township life at the height of apartheid rule in the 1970s. However, Niq Mhlongo is also part of the same generation which embraced the new democratic dispensation that promised a new lease on life for most Black students, for most Black people who had been denied opportunities under the apartheid system. At the age of 21, he enrolled for a Bachelor of Laws LLB at the University of Witwatersrand, and he graduated and began writing in 2003. His first novel, Dog Eat Dog, was published in 2004. Mhlongo's novels include Dog Eat Dog, After Tears, Way Back Home, Affluenza, Soweto Under the Apricot Tree, Paradise in Gaza, and his editorial contributions are to anthologies such as Black Tax and Joburg Noir. His most recent publications include Hauntings and For You Are Still a Goat. His awards and accolades include the 2006 Mardi International Spanish Literary Award for Dog Eat Dog, the 2019 Herman Charles Boosman Prize for Soweto Under the Apricot Tree, the 2019 Media 24 Books Literary Prize for Soweto Under the Apricot Tree, the 2021 National Institute for Humanities and Social Science Awards for Joburg Noir, and the 2022 HHS Awards Best Fiction Edited Work for Hauntings. Niq Mhlongo writes about and is passionate about Soweto. It is for this reason that he is one of Soweto's most treasured and beloved sons, as seen by his recent accolades and his international recognition. His works have been translated into Spanish, Dutch, and French. It is my proud honor to introduce to you to Niq Mhlongo. Thank you that he can take over.
Oh, thank you very much. It's an honor and privilege to be invited to have a discussion here with the university. And thanks for you, Motsusi, who has made this to happen, and other people that are working behind the scenes with you. I will just start reading From Dog Eat Dog, by the way, is the novel that was published in 2004, so it's 19 years old. You know, I was still young by then, so let me just, without wasting any time, read you what the first chapter, part of the first chapter. It starts as follows. Dear Mr. Njomane, the University of the Witwatersrand Bursary Committee acknowledges that it has received your application for a bursary dated the 4th of March. We regret to inform you that your application was unsuccessful. We have looked carefully at your application letter and based our decision on the information that you have supplied. Unfortunately, you did not meet the criteria set by this committee. We wish you every success in your future academic endeavors. Kind regards, Dr. Jane Winterburn, Chairperson and Registrar. I received that curt, insensitive letter on the warm evening of the 13th of March, 1994. I had just eaten my dinner at the YMCA in Braamfontein. The Y, as we affectionately call it, had offered me temporary accommodation for about a month now, while I tried to sort out my disagreement with the University Bursary Committee. I got off my bed and opened the drawer where I put my other two "we regret" letters. As if to make sure of their meaning, I unfolded each one and read it again. The wording was the same, except for the date. Did anybody even read my applications? I wondered angrily. I thought I had supplied everything that the Bursary Committee needed. Copies of and my mother's pension slip, an affidavit sworn at our local police station, giving the names and ages of the 9 other family members who depended on my mother's pension, as well as 3 other affidavits confirming all movables and immovable property that we owned. Although unfortunately my father did not own any immovable property, as the house in Soweto that we had been living in since 1963 was leased to us by the apartheid government for a period of 99 years. What more information do these people want about the poverty that my family is living in? I asked myself. Anger smoldered inside me as I read the letter again. What did the committee have to be so polite in dismissing my application? They should have told me plainly, we regret to inform you that you are black, stupid, and poor. Therefore, we cannot waste our money on your thick Bantu skull. I could have swallowed the words if they were simple and direct. Now the thought of being forced to part with the ditch's life of the Y because of the letter from the Bursary Committee was like a curse. It was as cruel as a man who chops off breast of the mother as the hungry baby tries to suckle the fresh milk from them. Did this mean I would be forced to hook up with those hopeless drunken friends of mine? Was I going back to that life of wolf whistling the ladies who passed by in the street, calling them izifebe or bitches, if they did not respond the way we liked? I felt like I was being pushed into the gorge filled with hungry crocodiles. Thank you.
Thank you as well, Niq Mhlongo. It goes without saying, it's 19 years of your text being groundbreaking. It's 19 years of your text really being part of a cultural cornerstone of the Black lived experience.
Yeah.
Without further ado, we're going to go into the question and answer session or portion of this convocation. And I think the first question I would like to ask is, how did you become a full-time writer and editor, considering that your academic background is in law?
Exactly. So my academic background is half law because I didn't finish it, I failed it. But the courses that I passed were the degree that I have is literature. It's BA in literature and majoring in literature and also in politics. So, I mean, from that you can tell that I always wanted to be a writer, but I just didn't know when I would start. Actually, when I was growing up, I wanted to be a journalist. So, but when I went to Wits University didn't have journalism as a course. So I thought like doing literature will help me to become a journalist, not to be a writer though, just to be a journalist. So I became a writer in a nutshell when it didn't work out in law, when I failed law, and I decided, let me go to my original, my original career, the career that I wanted to do. So that's when I started doing it. Actually, I started writing even when I was still doing law.
Thank you for that.
Sorry, do you hear me? Do you hear me properly? Because there's a sound coming from that side.
I can hear you properly. Maybe I can just ask the audience to type within the chat box if they can hear you properly as well.
Okay.
We can hear you. I can hear you. I think there's somebody. Maybe there's somebody whose mic is on. I also hear something like pots and pans. Sorry, like somebody's cooking or something.
Yeah,
sorry
exactly. Yeah.
Sianda and Tali, please can you mute your mic? Sianda and Tali, please mute your mic. Thank you for your response, Niq Mhlongo. Sorry about that, Niq Mhlongo.
Okay.
And thank you for your very eloquent response. I think we can all learn something from essentially failing your way to the top, taking the strengths and working with them to really draw out your passions. And your writing reflects that. I think your first two characters from Dog Eat Dog and After Tears are two dropouts, and one is a student who's average, and yet still there's a tale of survival and ferociousness.
Yeah.
So you embody that in Niq Mhlongo. We'll move on to the second question. And the second question reads, are there any particular influences or writing styles you draw inspiration from as you pen or write each of your novels or short stories?
I would say yes or no, and no. So, of course, there are people that write so very eloquently that I really, really admired. I can list few. I can list, for instance, Eskiam Pahlele, was one of my most favorite, Actually, the literature department at Wits in 1983 was established by him, and that's where I graduated. So he used to be my most favorite writer. And then another one was more like, not only him, but different ones, actually. So in Kenya, for instance, I grew up reading African literature, let me just say so. So in Kenya, I would go for Meja Mwangi. He used to be very, very great. Like, for instance, Going Down River Road used to be one of my favorite books. And then I go to Guinea, for instance, Kamaralaye, Nigeria, there are quite a number of them, Sapren Ekwensi, Chinua Achebe, Chimamanda Ngozi, different ones. But coming back to your question, I think those were their voices. I told myself, those are their voices. As Niq Mhlongo, I have to come with my own voice, because whatever they've written about you know, if you read it with it's very beautiful and it's lyrical, but also I have to mind that it's within the context of their times and their spaces. So in order for me to succeed or to do it in this world, I have to come with my own voice, the voice that will incorporate even the people, the real people. You can hear me? Hello?
I think the connection went bad there for a second.
Oh, okay. Sorry. But we're back now.
Yes,
Shall I
we're back
continue?
now.
Okay. So I was saying, to respond to your question, I admire different voices from all over the world. As I said, as I listed different kind of authors that influenced my writing, but only in terms of how to write. But in terms of a voice, I think I just told myself that I have to come with my own voice from the township, which will incorporate the way people talk. You know, that's why when you read my text, Dog Eat Dog, everything that I read that I write about, it also has the dialogue, a pure raw dialogue of the people in the township. So yeah, there are influences, but influences, you have to limit them in terms of you have to develop your own voice. Read, it's more important to read others and know actually how they write and admire them, but it's more important as well to have your own voice. Like, for instance, at the moment, I admire the way Niq Mhlongo writes within my contemporary writers. I admire Jem Coetzee, for instance. I admire Zakes Mda, but I have to find my own voice. So those are my influences. I take what I can take, but retain my own voice. Hello?
Wow, Dr. Mhlongo, wow. That is very dense, and thank you for that response. And it's very inspiring how you traverse the African continent, enjoying inspiration from different authors, different styles, and you try to be authentic to yourself, which is very inspiring on its own. To move on to our third question, what are the trials and frustrations, and more importantly, the sweet side of becoming a writer in contemporary South Africa?
Okay, I'll start with the sad part. The sad part is that unless your work, for instance, it's prescribed in schools, you can't. You mustn't expect money from it. You mustn't expect to be rich, or you cannot subsist with writing alone, you know? So people that are making it in writing are people whose books, for instance, are prescribed at high school, you know, or with universities, yes, but universities, you have to understand that if maybe it's done for first years, second years, that's better. But I'm just saying that because it depends on how many students are in that particular class. So you cannot make money, you know. And the worst part of it is that people will always think that writers are rich because they see you everywhere. I've been translated into 8 languages, but I'm not rich at all. So, but the greatest thing is that this is one of the most beautiful things about writing. It comes with lots of opportunities. There are opportunities, for instance, at a moment that if you are lucky, you might find your book, for instance, be adapted into film by Netflix, by whoever that is there, different but by different entities. There might be so when your book, like for instance, Dudu Busani Dube, I'm making this as an example. Her book has been made into a film. We have Angela Makora's books now. One of the books are in a film. We have who's that? Cynthia Jele, for instance. Dion Mayers of this world. We have quite a number of people whose books have been successfully adapted into films. So only when your work is there, then you can talk about, I can actually be a writer full time. But before that, you can't. Why? Because books in South Africa don't sell that much, and it's not fiction to say that if in South Africa, sadly, if you sell more than 2,000, of your books, you are one of the best sellers, because one thing is that books are a bit expensive compared to other countries. I mean, in South Africa. And of course, we got also lots of challenges of literacy, and we have to also make people to love books and to love to read. But this doesn't mean that people are not reading. People are reading, but maybe you'll find that 20 people are sharing one text. And that doesn't mean that a writer will live up to it means that the writer cannot live out of their own book. So that's the downside of it. So I've also highlighted the great side of it. If your book is adapted, for instance, that makes it it will be something for you. But also opportunities such as traveling the world, if you like the world, traveling the world. Also, it's more important when your work is taken into, people look at your work and appreciate it as a basis of reference, by universities and stuff. Like, for instance, I'll give you an example. It makes me happy to know that Dog Eat Dog is read in different institutions like New York University. It's read in Massachusetts. It's read in Vanderbilt University. It's read in different institutions. And it's read also, part of it, a chapter is read in, in Norway as a set work. So that in itself makes me happy as a writer. So my spirits are uplifted. So not only in terms of money, but also in terms of uplifting the spirit, knowing that you are playing a major role in the transformation of the literary landscape, not only in your South Africa, my world, or South African world, but in a bigger scale of things in the world at large. So that's the reward I'm talking about.
Thank you for that, Niq Mhlongo. And in hearing that you become very happy when you hear that your novels are being read all over the world, I would just like to show you how much your novels mean to us as cultural text and philosophical text within our particular department. So I would just like to anyone who's listening in right now to kindly type in their research projects if it involves any of Niq's text. That is to Mr. Mupi, to Ms. Shabalala, and myself. We're going to type in the names of our research projects here to show you which one of your texts, which we're individually using in our own research.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
Thank you, Zon Daddy. We move on to question number 4, and it reads: you wrote Dog Eat Dog while the ink on your degree had barely dried, and while you were writing your first novel, did you have any particular characters whom you liked more than any other characters? And if you do have a favorite character, which one and why do you like that character?
Good question. I think, to answer that, I think it's important for me to bring the context in which Dog Eat Dog was written. So in 1994, that's when I went to the university, Wits University. That means that a year before, it was difficult for many of us, or years, a little bit before, it was difficult for many of us to go into these institutions, more especially Wits, as you know, has been one of the almost, in inverted commas, whites-only institution, because it was driven by a quota. So the government, through the decree or legislation, will say, that university is white institution, it can only take 500 blacks, So from that point, in 1994, the floodgates opened, and most of us went there. We thought, wow, this is the freedom. So that's the context in which Dog Eat Dog was written. It was written in the context that many of us who found ourselves registering at this institution in this historic year in 1994 were ill prepared. Were ill prepared. No one told us that for the first time, Niq Mhlongo, we are going to be taught by a white person. And then I grew up, for instance, so it has got lots of cultural nuances around it. So I grew up, for instance, I'll give you an example, knowing that when an elderly person is talking to you, you cannot look at them in the eyes. It's a sign of disrespect. And then you go to the institution like Wits, you are taught by a white person who is older, who insists that you must call them by their name. And I'm not used to calling people by their names when they are older than myself, And then and you are used to so it was entering a new territory altogether. So okay, I think we cut a little bit. You understand? Are we together?
Yes, we did cut in Mhlongo.
Oh, okay. We're back together. Okay.
It's a new terrain.
Yeah. So sorry about that. Yeah. So all the characters that are there in Dog Eat Dog are characters that have to negotiate the new terrain. By the new terrain, I'm talking about the new way of looking into their own culture. So at home, you go back home, you have to talk to your grandmother who is older. You have to use granny. You don't have to use the name. And then you go to the university, somebody who's teaching you, a lecturer, you have to address them by name. So it means that in between, you have to learn to adapt in both situations, the cultural situations at your home and the new subculture which you are adopting, which is the university, where different people from all walks of life meet. So you have to do that. So the character that does that well, that of course I like, is a character that I created, the main character, of course, Dings, because for him, he is aware that in order to do this, you have to sometimes lie your way in these situations. So yes, going back to your question, definitely my main character, Dings. And Dings embodies is a character which I've stolen from my own way of negotiating the university and other people that I know from the university. So it's a blend of different, characters, if you like, it's a blend of what I've observed from my friends and what I thought my friends should be doing in order to succeed in this heinous kind of institution or environment, the environment that we're not allowed to be in, So you have to be in there, you have to force your way into there. So that's why the book is also called Dog Eat Dog, because it's the survival of the fittest. If you are not fit, you cannot survive. You don't even have to think about going into a terrain like Wits University.
Thank you for that, Niq Mhlongo. And coming back to Dog Eat Dog, I particularly appreciate how in the first few pages, Dingemans is confronted with a choice. It's either he goes back to the township or he ascends to the soft life of Wits. And in choosing to ascend to the soft life, he chooses to grow claws and become more ferocious than the system which is trying to beat him down.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of lessons we can learn from Dingemans. But I was hoping you're going to say is the taxi queue marshal from chapter 10, the one who...
Yeah.
The one But your novel is very rich, and I encourage everyone to start with Dog Eat Dog in learning Mhlongo's oeuvre. We quickly move on to question number 5, and it reads, your compilation of short stories such as Soweto Under the Apricot Tree, For You Are Still a Goat, and more recently Hauntings, are preoccupied with illustrating the post-apartheid experience of ordinary South Africans from a variety of perspectives. What are some of the writing strategies you employ in promoting your hometown, Soweto, in light of how you've placed it on the cultural map as a result of each of your publications?
Yeah, it boils back down to the point that, I'm always a writer that writes. There are the different kind of writers. Let me just start by saying. So there are writers that can easily write about utopia, dystopia, and the writers that write about, places that they have never been. So I'm one of the writers that is opposite to that. I feel comfortable writing about things that I know, things that are accessible to me, So Soweto was closer to me. I live there. If I'm not in Germany, I live in Soweto. That's where my home is. I was born there. So and it is rich in so many stories. Some of the stories that are normally dismissed by the mainstream publishing spaces, So my aim of writing about Soweto, for instance, was to write about those stories that are said that when I was growing up, people didn't believe that there were good stories. I write stories about the ghosts, for instance, our belief. I grew up in Soweto knowing that, there's a Vera the ghost, But if you wrote that story before maybe around the 90s and wanted it to be published, for instance, no publication house would publish it. Because why? We were channeled to think that stories have to be this way, have to talk about cities, Jimmy going to city every now and then. Have to talk about, so meaning that stories that have to do with, that include the beliefs of Black people were not stories. So that's the reason what influenced me to write about Soweto, because it is literally and figuratively a gold mine of stories, There's somebody who nicely put it that in each and every pavement of the township, there's a story, So those are the things that we need to write about. That I felt like I needed to write about. And I felt like it's more, I would say, easier to address them, to tackle those stories in a form of short stories, you know, because of the different kind of themes that you can dig out of the stories, you know. So there's different themes, like vigilante stories, I put them there. There's stories about, as I say, ghosts, I put them there. Gangsterism, I put them there. So those are the themes that yeah. So yeah, but I was done. I was done actually when the interruption came. Yeah. So that's the thing. I love the township, more especially Soweto, as we have said earlier on, that Soweto is when we talk about Soweto, we talk about the biggest township in South Africa, for instance. With more than 1 million or so, we don't know how many. Even the census don't know. So people of coming from different walks of life. That's the place where, you know, one of the few places in South Africa where people speak almost half of each and every language, South African language. And in that, when you are like that, you know, I grew up also speaking different kind of languages, you know. So, and when you are like that, language in itself, more especially the language in Soweto, for instance, give you a key and access to different stories from that originate from you know, the diverse places where people come from that make Soweto. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Niq Mhlongo. And coming to your most recent publication, For You Are Still of Gold, it's largely centered in Soweto, and it's written during COVID-19. Were you in Soweto during COVID-19?
No, I was in Berlin. I was here, exactly where I am now. Yeah, and that's where I live at the moment. But I live both Berlin and Joburg. Yeah. So yeah, so that was written when I was here in Berlin at the difficult time of COVID of 2020. I had come here on a fellowship, one of the most prestigious fellowships called DAAD in Germany, where you can stay in Germany for the whole year writing. So that was one of the projects. Also, the novel called Paradise in Gaza. So those were and Joburg Noah. So those were the three, you know, three books that came out of it. Yeah.
Thank you for the hard work on that day, and it's inspiring that you don't stop writing. Even on social media, we see that you continue with your craft.
Thank you.
And departing from that question, for any inspiring writers or authors who might be in this convocation, what encouraging words can you give to them if they want to pursue a career in creative writing?
You know, I get asked that question a lot, and my answer is always the same. Is that people that want to be writers should be good readers. If you want to write, for instance, novels, read a lot of novels, and short stories. If you want so that works. That's not. Yeah, sorry. Yeah. So I let me just. I wonder if I got the first gist. Hello?
Hi, Ndate. We left you at one should be a good reader, one should be a good
Yeah.
writer.
Yeah, and then another thing that you have to do is that I'll give you, don't wait until you are very, until late. In writing, there's no postponement. So you better write something that you feel like, even if it's not publishable at that particular moment, keep writing it. One of the regrets that I have was that I started writing late. It's something that I think like I should have written earlier. Until at some point I've read Nadine Gordimer, for instance, saying that she was a published author at the age of 13. I said, what was I waiting for? So you keep on writing, and then always whenever there's an author, for instance, coming to your university or to your environment, your surrounding, wanting to, coming to talk about books, always attend. It's always good to attend those to get tips. So first tip, read a lot and write, and never undermine what you are writing. One day it will make sense, even if it doesn't make sense now.
Thank you for that, Niq
Yeah.
Mhlongo. It has been very dense and very impactful experience, words you've shared with us in this question and answer session. We could have gone on and on, but I think now is the time I open the floor to the rest of the convocation who might have questions for you.
Yes.
So colleagues, if you have questions for Niq Mhlongo, please raise your hands and we go in a sequential order. Zandile, you can ask your question. Hi, Zandile, you can ask your question.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Mr. Niq Mhlongo. I'm one of honor student, and I'm reading your short story collection for my research paper. So the question I have is, were you intentionally being humorous as you were writing that short story collection, and why the name of the book? Why did you name the book For You At Still a Boat? Why that heading instead of any other heading you could have come up with?
Okay. Thank you for the question, Zandile. I've been told that my books are very humorous, all of them actually. But normally when you write, humor is not, from my point, at least from my point of view, humor is not something that I intend writing. Is that sometimes, as I said earlier on, when I do researches of my books, so humor has to take I take mostly the dialogue of the places that I visit, that where I set my book in. So humor for me depends on the character that I employ to use certain words in my writing, and the stupid things in most cases that they do, for instance. So it's not something that is intentional, because you cannot measure humor. What can be humorous to me, it might not be humorous to another person. So, but I'm glad that you take most of it as some of it as humor. It's because the characters themselves are real characters. When I talk about somebody that has failed at the university, I'm talking about the real character, that I have, for instance, modeled into a little bit differently from the characters that I know. So I take from characters that I know. So mostly I hang around people who are doing that, or maybe I read a lot, I listen to gossip, I do everything, you know, to make that character workable within the purpose of that particular theme of a story. So I think that's where humor emanates. It's not something that I sit down and say, this is humorous. No, because I don't know what humor is when I'm writing, you know. But at the end of the day, my characters, because of the themes and the things that they have to go through, become humorous. So that's one way of answering it. And then in terms of the title itself, normally with titles, I'm not good. And there are certain, I need intervention. That title came up with my editor when they were reading the story. And I felt like, the correct title could be this one. The nice title could be that one. So some title, what I'm trying to say is that when you are writing, you have to be open as well. You must know that once you write something, it's no longer yours. It becomes a public thing. So if somebody reads your work and tells you, this is how I interpret it, it's because your work is open to interpretation. So when I wrote this story, it had a different title. And then I sent the manuscript to my publisher and the editor. And they both said, the title that you sent us, it's might work, but how about we look into this particular title? And I said, yes, that works. You know, at first I was very reluctant about it, but later I realized that it might work. I wonder if I answered your question.
Yes, and Niq Mhlongo, I'm well answered. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the questions, Zandile. And thank you again, Niq Mhlongo, for reiterating the road you had to navigate in coming up with you our Steeler Goals.
Thanks.
We have a question in the comment section for you. Ask Peter Mupi to read it out aloud for us, please.
Thanks, Nare and Mr. Mhlongo. We have Ntabiso Mashiho in the comment section that she says your autobiography is interesting. My question is, do you read your book reviews? How do you deal with bad or good ones?
Okay, book reviews, what I read them. Okay. Okay, let me just first say it's not an autobiography. You know, it's definitely not an autobiography. Like, as I said, an autobiography, of course, will have my name on it as main character. So it's definitely not. But it's the stories that has been taken, some of the things that I've experienced there, that have been experienced there, are my own experiences. Some are not my own experiences. I took other people's experiences and made them my own using the character. I'll give you an example. For instance, when I went to Wits University myself, I never had a problem with, getting a bursary. So I got a bursary immediately, and I got the residence immediately. But I was watching close friends and other people that didn't get a bursary, and I thought I used the premise: what if that was me? So that's the premise in which I've written the story. So that's why I'm saying it's not my biography at all, but there are certain things that I've experienced that are part of the that I've written there. And when it comes to book reviews, I read book reviews. I know people that don't read book reviews, that don't like book reviews. Like a friend of mine, Chimamanda, for instance, she hates book reviews. And then I love book reviews because for me, they show exactly where I can make my writing better. You know, as I said earlier on, once you write a book, I believe that when I write a book, when I publish it, it's no longer my book. It's our book. It's the book of the readers. It's a book of Niq Mhlongo. Because also after that, I still say, I see, somebody writing about, this book could have been better if the author did A, B, C, and D, you know? And I take that and employ that in my next books, you know, writings. I'll give you an example. I wrote Dog Eat Dog, one of the most, I think, true, also review of the book or critic of the book is that it's one of those books that do not end, but it stops. So I realized, what do they mean? It means that my book could have just had a better ending, you know, and a better plot. You know, it's something that I was not good at. So I use that kind of, engagement with my readers to write better. So I do read book reviews for that purpose.
Thank you, Dr. Mhlongo, and thank you, Thabiseng Mashego, for that question. I think that Ms. Mashego was trying to say your biography, the one which outlines your achievements and the works you've done.
Oh, okay. So sorry, I thought maybe he was referring to Dog Eat Dog's biography. I misunderstood the question. I'm sorry about that.
It's okay, Dr. Mhlongo. I would like to give the mic to Mr. Mupi, who has a question for you.
Okay.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Mhlongo and Mr. Nare, for the engaging conversation. I think my question is coming out of the context or a recent context in South Africa about the decolonizing the universities. And as Mr. Nare has mentioned, we are reading several of your books, and we want to understand the decolonial motif in your work, particularly Dog Eat Dog. How can we read this text as a decolonial narrative?
Yeah, of course, it's a hard one, to answer, because first of all, we have to definitely define what decolonialism is, decolonizing is, and of course, it is one of the topics that are hot topics, and we are full versed of what we mean by that. So I think one of the ways, let me just start by saying that when I read, I think this might also answer in passing some what you are asking. Sorry. So when Dog Eat Dog came out in 2004, when I was also writing it, I was writing it to highlight the challenges that a Black student faces at institutions of higher learning, specifically at WITS. Why specifically at WITS is that WITS University, for instance, is an institution, as I said earlier on, institution that is white dominated even now, but above all is an institution that more especially, it was almost white-only institution. So by decolonizing, my understanding of decolonizing is that if you say an institution has to be decolonized, we mean that, from my point of view, one of the meanings of it's got many meanings. One of the meanings could be that that particular institution should take into context the privileges and underprivileges of its students' body, not only student body, but also workers and everyone that is within it, you know, for all of us to benefit. It has to take that into account, you know. It has to take into account when it employs, for instance, my mother, that she cannot come at work to work when you know, at this particular hour of the morning, perhaps because she lives in the township where there is lots of it's dangerous to cross a particular you know, place, street to work and stuff like that. I'm just making an example, and it might be a lousy one. But when we look into Dog and Dog, one of the things that it talks about the rift that exists between those who have been those who own or those who control the institutions of higher learning and those that it's supposed to teach, more especially Black students, for instance, you know. So it talks about things like that have to be taken into account. Like, for instance, it talks about one of the things, for instance, it talks about when we talk about the level of failure rate by mostly Black students at institutions, higher institutions like Wits University. I'll keep making reference to the Wits University because that's where the book is set and so forth. But you can always refer to your institutions that I don't know. So when we talk about the level, the rate of failure at Wits University around my time, it was Black people. And you come to, if you read Dog and Dog, you'll understand that we fail because we are the ones that are dealing with so many issues at the institutions. For the institution to, you know, to embrace us, we have to do a lot, unlike other students that are privileged, in most cases, white students. Why is that? It's because of the privileges that the white students already had in the past, you know. When they go home to study, they have their own rooms, for instance. We don't have, you know. You sleep with your uncles and whatever in the same room because there's nothing at home. So what does that do to you? It means that when you have to study, you have to be considerate to somebody that you are using the room with inside the house, you know. And then it also means that when during my time, for instance, when other students who are privileged are busy learning, I'm busy sorting out my because they don't wait. The lecturers don't wait and say, let's wait for Niq Mhlongo to sort out this bursary before we allow him, before we start the class. The class is going on there, but you are busy queuing at the university, you know, accommodations office, so that you can get a accommodation. You are busy fighting with the bursary, but the lecturer here comes and say, those who did not pay are not allowed because the institution says you are not allowed. So I'm not learning, and I miss a lot because my mind is busy sorting out this thing first. By the time the exam comes, I'm bound to fail. So, so when we talk about decolonizing, we mean that, from my point of view, one of the things that have to be addressed is those levels of inequality. We have to take into account that these institutions, for instance, have to take into account that we are not all coming from the same level of wealth. We don't have generational wealth as Black people, you know. So the little I get, for instance, as a bursary student, I have to share with at home. The little that I have, sometimes I cannot be able to study because I have to travel a long distance. Sometimes I don't have money to go to the institution. So if when we talk about decolonizing, is that those are the things that institutions of higher learning in South Africa also have to look into. And also, when we have to look into education itself, we have to study things that are relevant to us. You know, institutions, since the syllables, for instance, are on Shakespeare, even schools, syllabuses are on Shakespeare. I failed English first attempt because I didn't know what to, I didn't comprehend some of the things that were said on Romeo and Juliet or on, you know, because they were a little bit alien to me, you know. We have writers that talk about issues that are South African or that are African, that we should start, you know, putting in the syllable, you know. So if we do that, our education become relevant to us. So that's my understanding of decolonization. And that's exactly some of the things that I think Dog Eat Dog as a text addresses or highlights, not addresses, it highlights them and, you know, poses to us and say, okay, what do we do when a student, for the first time coming out of the township, going into the whites-only institution, being taught for the first time by a white lecturer. In most cases, at Wits, for instance, I was taught by a person, some of the people come from Ireland, who I didn't know whether they're speaking English or what, you know. In that level, when we do that, is it most relevant? Let's add something in our syllabus, for instance, you know, that really speak about us. That will also make us being interested in our own spaces. So those are the kind of things that perhaps Dog Eat Dog was raising, because it talks about the challenges of a Black child in institutions of higher learning. Some of these challenges can be addressed when we make higher institutions accessible and more relevant to what you know, South Africa is today, you know, and what we want South Africa to be. So we cannot talk about rainbow nations while our books, for instance, a book by Zeksim Dai, a book by Eskiam Pahlele, a book by you know, Thomas Mufulo or Sol Plaatje is not read at the institutions, at our institutions. What kind of decolonization are we talking about? Or what kind of rainbow nation we're talking about? Because these are the people that are relevant to us, that show us that we are coming from this place and going to this place. So, yeah, so Dog Eat Dog addresses that. Even when, you know, it talks about a student being in the lecture class, the things that they're being taught are not relevant to this person. It makes us, it shows that it makes us to lack, you know, interest in what we're being taught, because some of us think some of the things are irrelevant, you know. So I wonder if I answered your question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mhlongo, for the extensive answer you did, more than I expected even. We have a question from Prof. Nyambi. Prof. Nyambi, you may go.
Yes, thanks so much, Peter, and thanks to Niq for that reading and the engagement. It's quite enlightening. My question, Niq, I'm wondering what Berlin is doing to you. Berlin as a location, Berlin as a culture, and perhaps as a way of life as well.
Yeah.
Would you say the stories that you are writing there are the stories that would have been told the way they are being told if you were in Soweto? And perhaps as an adjunct to that, how would you compare the writing and the reading culture in Germany and South Africa?
Okay.
The writers in Germany living off their work, would you say?
Okay. Yeah, thanks for that question. Very, very important. So I'm a resident of Germany. I'm a resident of Berlin. One of the things that attracted me being here is that there are lots of activities, cultural activities that are happening within the city that are not actually happening in South Africa, for instance. Every week here, or almost every day, there's a cultural activity that is going on. Book reading there, art gallery there, exhibition there, so different types of art space. So Berlin itself is an art space. And I want to be in that kind of place because that's where you are able to share knowledge and also to learn from others, I'll give you an example. One of the things that that when you read in Berlin, short stories are not very much, are not known, are not fashionable in Berlin. So you write short stories, people normally don't read. And I know people talk about Kafka and stuff. Kafka is actually coming from Czech Republic, which is a little, of course, has been appropriated by Berliners. But in Czech Republic, in Prague, where I visited quite a lot, not very far from here, from Berlin, is that they're claiming him. He was a short story writer, of course. So, but in Berlin, when you talk about short stories, no, there's no writers of short stories. Novels, definitely, there are quite a number of them. But what is my important, attraction to Berlin is that as a resident, for instance, I can apply for different fundings, of different books that I want to write. There are lots of art is taken very much seriously, and anything that has to do with art, it also has. With us in South Africa, when I think about it, you can only apply from National Arts Council, for instance. Here, there are lots of entities that you can apply from, and even it also, for that matter, even as a foreign student, for instance, you can apply from it, or a foreigner, you can apply. So it really shows how important art is taken here. And then, so the culture of reading is high. I'll give you another example. So during lockdown, you remember that lots of things were closed. Shops were closed and whatever. But in Berlin, in Germany, there are a few things that were open, that a few shops that were open were left open. One of them, number one, was a bookstore. Bookstores, they say it shouldn't close because you are killing the spirit of a human being if you close a bookshop. You can close everything, a bottle store or whatever, but not a bookstore. It should be left open. So that really tells you how much people value culture of reading. Another thing, it's one of the cities, everywhere in Europe, but Berlin, for instance, has got many parks here. So you go around, even now when I'm speaking to you, there are cemeteries inside the city, different kind of cemeteries. But those are not only cemeteries, those are reading spaces. You can take your book and read there throughout the night. There are lights inside the cemetery, and then you can read in the parks. So there are lots of parks. So every place has got a bench, and then you can read there, So that's why the culture of something that I cannot do where I come from. Anywhere in Joburg, you cannot do. But the main thing that drove me to be here is also load shedding. It's very difficult to write under such kind of environment, you know. And as a writer, when I have to write about South Africa, I think I write well about my place nostalgically when I write from outside. So Berlin is just that perfect space where I can reflect and write nostalgically and beautifully about my place while I'm away and comparing it to other places. So there are quite a number of things. Like, what do I do as well? I'll just tell you another thing that I do. I teach also here. So I teach in a school in Switzerland, for instance, which is about, you know, maybe by train can be 8 hours or so. But I go there on different occasions, maybe 4 times a year, teach for 2 weeks, 2 weeks, 2 weeks, each and every quarter. But that is a school, a high school. Is the high school in Switzerland, in Zurich, in an area called Baden. That's where Albert Einstein went to in that area, went to school in that area. But the beauty of it is that, what do I teach? I teach creative writing, short story writing to kids, you know, I mean, learners around 14, between 14 and 17, who are still in high school. And I teach them creative writing, how to write short stories and stuff. So imagine such a course. It's a course in a school, creative writing. Imagine if we had that in South Africa, how that would be, you know, because my friend just sent me something to say that, look here, it's something I think it was written in South Africa by a newspaper yesterday, saying that most of us cannot, most of the learners in South Africa cannot read, cannot read. I just lack for a better word. They cannot read properly, you know. So imagine if ever they had such courses as you know, creative writing or so, whereby they are given interest of reading about their own stories. That will give them you know, a better way of writing anyway, you know. So I think we still lag behind in terms of that. When I think about my home country, we lag behind in terms of that, because you know, art is relegated to the, you know, the last rung of our, you know, of our priorities, you know. So we have to get our priorities right. Europe is getting priorities right. I mean, I'm talking about places that I have been, you know. They are getting their priorities right by making sure that arts is one of the things that goes, because with art, when you talk about art, you have included everything. It includes politics inside it, you know, it includes economics, it includes culture. So if that is introduced, the thing that we've been trying to build, the rainbow nation and whatever, it can be achieved easily, you know, because children will be taught, you know, to read this particular thing, you know, this particular book earlier on. And then that particular book, for instance, will help them to deal with issues like xenophobia, like Afrophobia and whatever, you know, because it's something that is close to them. So, well, this is my wish that, you know, literature should be introduced in South Africa, for instance, schools, as a compulsory subject, just like, you know, any other subject, you know. So it will help, yeah.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mhlongo. We have last question from Dr. Tivenga. Can we please keep it short? We are almost ahead of our time.
Okay.
Thanks very much, Dr. Tivenga.
Thanks, Peter. And thanks, Niq, for your insights on writing. It's unfortunate that I missed part of the discussion because I joined late due to some circumstances beyond my control. So my question is related to something you said in response to a question that was asked earlier. I can't remember who asked the question, but you mentioned that when you write, what you write ceases to be, or the book, maybe the novel that you write ceases to be your own book. It becomes the property of the readers who read the writing. Yes. So my question is, I don't know if you know about this, I've heard some writers say they write for themselves. They don't write for anyone, they write for themselves, and they have to be allowed to write what they want because they write for themselves. And it really sounds absurd to me that somebody writes and then goes on to publish the work and still insists that they write for themselves. What's your take on that?
Let me disappoint you. I also write for myself. You know, yeah. I also write for myself. The only time I write for others is when I'm commissioned and paid money to write for others. Like, I'll give you an example. What is it? Jonathan Ball commissioned me to write and edit black text. That was commissioned work. Hauntings, commissioned work. Jobek Noor, commissioned work. You know, so I was asked and say specifically, write for this. Because once you say you write for others, it means that when you set out to write, you tell yourself that, will Motsusi like this? You know? Would Hunter like this? You know? So I don't do that. I write for myself, and then if Motsusi or Hunter likes it, that's beautiful. I love it, you know? So they're part of me. And if ever they criticize, they're open also to criticize or do whatever with the text that I've written. But at first point, I write for myself, you know, because the stories that I come with and the themes that I want to talk about are mine, you know. That's why you find that when I wrote Dog Eat Dog, for instance, giving that example, I wrote Dog Eat Dog and I thought, oh, I'm writing for, wonderful Black people to read it so that when they go to the university, they understand what they are going into. They are going into the lion's den. And you know who was the reader of that book when it comes to statistics? It's experienced old white women that are reading it who say, I like it. They were not my intended audience, you know. So it's difficult when you write and say, I'm writing for these particular people, because I want my audience to be everyone. It's limiting when you say, I'm writing for these people, you know. It's not a magazine. It's not like a magazine whereby when I'm writing, I say, this magazine is called Drum Magazine. It will only serve for people below between the ages of 18 and 40, and they are Black. No, it doesn't work like that. Writing, you pick out your own theme, and then your story, you write it, and then you are open to anyone that would like your work to read it. And how they interpret that is their own story. That's why I'm saying the story becomes theirs once they interpret it. But I started writing the story and thought it was mine. But now that I thought it was mine, I was so naive that the story is only mine. Look how it has spread. It has spread to white people that I never thought they would read. I thought this was a black story. I never thought they would understand the total that I've put. But only to find that I've piqued their interest, you know. So first of all, I write for myself, and then, but I'm happy, and I become more happier when the book is read and interpreted by different people, even those that the story was not intended for. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Mhlongo, and thank you, Dr. Divenga, for the question. In the interest of time, we'll take one last question quickly from Brad. Brad?
Okay, thank you very much, Peter, and thanks, Niq, for the discussion. In response to the previous question on how how German is affecting the way you write your stories. You mentioned something like you are writing nostalgically.
Yeah.
I almost thought you're writing as an outsider, writing about Johannesburg. Are you not in fear at some point that when you're writing a story, some reader at some point will say, well, maybe this is not the Johannesburg that I know?
Yeah, I do understand that. And it's more important. It's my Johannesburg that I'm writing about. And then Johannesburg is not just a constant a place. It's changing every 5 minutes, depending on how you interpret it, you know. So what I'm trying to say is that it's more important. It goes on to every writer that is, a person that wants to be a writer out there. There is no story that has not been told before, you know. So the beauty of the story is the story that has been retold and in a different way and interesting way each and every time. So I'm writing from Joburg, I'm writing from Berlin and writing from Joburg. For me, it makes me to look into Joburg in a different eye, comparative eye, an eye that I also am writing and also looking into things that work in Berlin. Like, for instance, I'll give you an example. When I was still in Joburg at Wits University, we had art galleries that we could go to. Né? And then where we saw Picasso for the first time. Where are those now? They've fallen apart because of the neglect that is there. So when I write about Joburg at the moment, I will write nostalgically well because I'll compare it from the past to the present, from the place that I am and the place that that is and Joburg that is away at the moment from me, and I look at it in a different eye, an eye which is not which allows me to put on my own value to the way I describe things, because now I'm comparing it to how Germany love art, how Germany love their art, preserve their art galleries, and now I'm looking at Joburg, which art galleries are no longer that much important. Pictures, drawing, paintings of Picasso that has been bought in 1800s and whatever, or whenever, are rotting, because no one cares about it, you know. So I'll write from about Joburg in a different eye. That's what I mean. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Mhlongo, and thank you, everyone. I would like to comment on the conversation again. It was far engaging, and thank you for the lengthy responses. We had so many questions to ask. However, in the interest of time, I would like to hand over to Mr. Nare to give a vote of thanks to you and dismiss the convocation.
Thank you.
Thank you once again, Niq Mhlongo, and to everyone else who has taken part in this convocation. In particular, we'd like to thank Dr. Hansa Henning for organizing it and dealing with the technicalities, dealing with the emails, and helping us put this series this afternoon together. It has been a delightful one. Thank you to the students at large who came in and participated. to our faculty members, our members from the UFS family who are with us this afternoon. And most importantly, thanks to you, Niq Mhlongo.
I really appreciate it.
When we began our postgrad back in 2019, we were introduced to Plato. And Plato says that art is something which is twice removed from reality. However, picking up your novels, your short stories, and your anthologies, you help the work of a philosopher to be easier in that your works help us to locate ourselves within different systems.
Wow.